Welcome back to the Beardsley Doctrine and part 2 of Article 6 that deals with the media and how their reporting misleads Americans to support policies that are bad for our future and how their deceptive information works to divide and distract us enough so we don't realize the flawed direction of our country. Now in part 1 we covered the main takeaway from Article 6. And it's pretty simple. The media only promotes policies and praises people that are bad for you and bad for America. And conversely, the media only discredits policies and demonizes people that are good for you and good for America. We also covered the first tactic on how all too often the media is misleading on important issues by only presenting you with the points on an issue they want you to know. They often aren't lying, they just happen to forget all the other information that you need to know about an issue. Remember this slide? I hope that you paid closer attention to the news since we talked last to identify this tactic of just not telling you the whole story. But on top of just being misleading, they use several other tactics, many which are hard to identify, to convince you to support the wrong things and the wrong people. If you're still relying on the media to provide the information that you need to make important decisions, still relying on people that don't have an allegiance to your family and your country, then it's essential that you stay tuned in for part 2 and part 3. Because today I want to discuss more of these misleading tactics. I want you to be wise about what's good, but I also want you to be wise about what's evil. So let's talk about some of the other tactics that you get exposed to on a daily basis. The second reason that it's a bad idea to use the media to make important decisions in life is that the media just gets it wrong way too often. Misinformation is the buzzword today. It's wrong so often it's hard to believe that it isn't done on purpose. You can just take a look here on the screen. Just outright misinformation on COVID. Remember the magic bubble you could live in if you just got the vaccine? Or the hydroxychloroquine was dangerous and useless? We were winning the Afghan war for years. Just send more money in your kids to seal the deal. We all know how that turned out. Or the peaceful protests that burned down our cities, injured countless, and even killed people. Those were peaceful protests according to the media. But January 6th was an insurrection, you were told. If it was an insurrection, it was the first insurrection in the history of the world to take place without weapons and without a single person dying, other than an unarmed woman protester who was shot to death. Even 2,000 years ago, insurrectionists brought sticks and stones to an insurrection. But the media says this insurrection took place without any weapons at all. It's ridiculous. With likely over 1,000 cameras in the House of Representatives and thousands of hours of video recorded during this time, with about $1 of camera footage, this issue could have been resolved in a few minutes. But now, over a year and a half and hundreds of millions of our hard-earned dollars later, we still haven't seen the footage and the media is still perpetrating this farce on America. I don't care what side of this issue you're on. Don't you think by now if there's a video of people overthrowing the government that you would have seen it by now? But like most of the information you receive, it's false and misleading with an intent to divide and create problems, not solve them. What's ironic is they always get it wrong in a direction that mislead people into either supporting policies and people that are bad for their future or creating division among Americans. Now I could spend the next year citing reported stories that just ended up being wrong. Stories that influenced how people act, lived, voted, and even died, even though these stories were false. Big stories like Saddam Hussein had chemical weapons. That false story sent thousands of U.S. servicemen to their death and maimed tens of thousands. Or the Taliban were the most dangerous people ever. So bad we had to send thousands more men and women to die or be maimed. Or Syria used chemical weapons on their citizens. All false. How about recently? Russia was going to use chemical weapons. That was a fact based on intelligence. Intelligence so top secret that they couldn't share it. But the truth came out. They couldn't share it because it didn't exist. It was just made up to mislead you to support another war that's bad for your future. What about the terrorist mastermind that we bombed in Afghanistan a day after death of 13 of our troops last year due to more gross negligence by our country's leadership? Remember that story? We were in Afghanistan for 20 years, spent trillions of dollars, had tens of thousands of troops on the ground, rolled the skies with aircraft and endless drones, and employed hundreds of thousands of Afghans on our side. Yet this terrorist mastermind, he walked the streets, we couldn't identify him. By the time of the bombing, almost all our troops had exited the country. The Afghan government had collapsed. Our Afghan employees and informants gone. Air support drones gone. Yet, within 24 hours of the bombing, with no intelligence support left, no Afghan government, no troops, we were able to find and execute the bomber mastermind. Now, when the media broke this story, lots of people watching this video heard me say the same day, this is nonsense. I said it would be almost impossible to ID a bomber that we couldn't ID for 20 years while we were in the country, but we did it in a day after we left. I said it was a guy going to the store for his mother, and that we executed him as a propaganda stunt to distract Americans from the death of our troops and the gross negligence that killed these men and women. But the media and the government said it was a fact. Only American haters would say otherwise. But a month later, the truth came out. The guy was carrying water for his family, and him and several in his family were executed by our government merely as a propaganda stunt. But forget just big stories. Countless stories end up being false. Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian information. Ukraine's a model democracy worth dying for. The Capitol police officer got beat to death with a fire extinguisher. The resource officer traded fire with the recent school shooter. This tactic extends to almost every piece of information reported. The credibility of the media is so questionable. To use them to help us make important decisions is a mistake that continues to cost Americans their lives and their future. If you wait long enough, the truth always comes out, even if the media doesn't see fit to report it. You will be much closer to the truth if you believe the exact opposite of what they tell you. I'm not kidding. What you'll find, although sometimes you have to wait years for the truth to come out, that the opposite of what they said about people, policies, and ideas at the time was closer to the truth. Now, Tactics 3 is one of the oldest propaganda tools. It's the concept of repetition. Keep repeating the same misinformation over and over again, and people eventually believe it. Not only believe it, they will never be compelled to verify the story because the repetition gives the impression that this is a fact of that question. Only a dummy would question this known truth. As shown on the screen, just because a lot of people in the media repeat the same lie, that doesn't make it true. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that even though there are many sources and mediums of information out there, broadcast news, cable news, books, papers, radios, magazines, textbooks, the majority of these are controlled by a small number of companies, a small number of people. Take a look yourself if you don't believe me. This small number of companies basically have a monopoly on what you get to see and hear. So when you see it on the news tonight, then hear it on the radio when driving home tomorrow, then read it in the paper the next day, you get the false impression that countless independent sources have concluded the same truth, and so should you. While in reality, it's likely the same company or same small group of companies controlling everything you know just through different mediums. There's no consensus, no independent investigation, one group forcing their failed ideas and beliefs upon you. Think of it like this. For those of you that read the Bible and Revelation, a seven-headed beast emerges from the sea to destroy whatever godliness is left on earth. Most large media companies are a lot like that beast. Each head on the beast represents a different way to communicate the misinformation, hate, and division. The intention is to destroy all the goodness that's left in our country. You think you're being presented a universal truth and a common belief held by all. In reality, it's the same beast telling you the same lie, but each time using a different head to convince you to believe something that's bad for your future. So I absolutely want you to look out for repetition. When you're bombarded with information from multiple sources and stations that all say exactly the same thing, when you hear endless repetition on a point, stop and be suspect, because you're likely falling for the old repetition trick. Now, FDR is certainly not my favorite president, but this excellent quote is attributed to him. Repetition does not turn a lie into a truth. Remember that. Repetition does not turn a lie into a truth. The information isn't true. It isn't supported by any evidence. It's the information that's most often presented to you in endless repetition. Now, trick 4 is one of the most common tactics used. It's the division tactic. Just like the picture shows, they drive wedges in between good Americans. And if they go unchecked, they will destroy America and leave it in pieces. Division is the gold standard for ensuring we lose and they win. This one should be easy to recognize by now because it goes on every day. The plan: keep us divided and fighting among ourselves so we're too distracted to realize who the real threats to our country are. Non-stop news that has no purpose other than to divide our country. Now, race-based division and political party division are the most common ones. But we continue to see Americans also get pitted against each other based on religion, sexual orientation, sex, vaccination status. You name it, they divide us with it. Every day you're bombarded with reasons to fear, hate, and distrust your friends and family. Whites are domestic terrorists and are the biggest threat to our country. Republicans should be eliminated due to the dangers they present. Democrats are a part of a satanic cult. Unvaccinated people are murderers. Whites are all racist. Every day, the information given is presented in a way not to create unity among Americans to work together to solve problems, but to create distrust and dislike among fellow Americans who don't even know each other. This ploy works to divide our country by creating agitation and resentment in the marginalized group, and for everyone else to dislike and distrust the marginalized group. So when the media goes about their normal business of agitating and marginalizing, especially like whites and conservatives, with an endless stream of sensationalized hand-picked stories of the risks that these people present, the real goal is to agitate blacks, non-whites, and liberals in our country. What do you think the response is when they make every white-on-black crime a national media story, blame every shortcoming on racism, and drone on about how conservatives are a threat to our country? It creates hate and trust in blacks towards whites. This manufactured resentment gets manifested in their interactions with white people and thus fuels the division in our country. Now, another popular approach to creating division in our country, the double standard ploy. The media creates two different standards for the groups that they want to pit against each other and divide. It's often used with race, but can also be used as a tactic against political parties and several of the other groups that they try to divide us into. Now, like above, we looked at how they like to agitate blacks in our country by hyping up stories of hateful white people to ensure that black people stay distrustful and angry at whites. But the double standard scheme is generally used against whites to ensure they stay distrustful and angry at blacks. I could cite about 1 million examples of the double standard, but here are a few that should be familiar. Things like there can be a black national anthem, but a white one will be racist. When a white person commits a crime against a black person, the media sensationalizes it as a hate crime, makes it a national media event. But when it's the other way around, you don't even hear about it. You can have a black congressional caucus, but not a white one, because a white caucus would be racist. Black politicians can stand up and say, I'm here to help my people, but if a white politician did that, he'd lose his job. When white parents said they wanted white teachers for their children or white police officers for their neighborhood, they were called white supremacists. But when black parents say they want black teachers for their children or black officers, the media thinks it's genius. How about when white people succeed? According to the media, they succeed because of white privilege. But black people succeed because of hard work. Conversely, black people fail because of racism. White people fail just because they're failures and aren't good enough. Remember this double standard during COVID? Our government, with the media's support, they declared white people will get the vaccine last and life-saving medicine last simply because they're white. Not only is this blatant racism, it defies all scientific facts as to how these supposedly helpful drugs should have been administered if your goal was to help people that needed it most. But double standards like this and countless others, they're not intended to help people, but rather divide them. These are just part of a long list of double standards that are used to agitate people. But if you don't recognize them, this intentional scheme, or understand its purpose, you're allowed to create anger and agitation that you direct at the wrong people. Now, unfortunately, too many Americans are still falling for this scheme. And when you get fooled by this scheme, you channel your frustration against the people in the group that got preferential treatment. In this case, white people get angry with blacks. It's just human nature. The media, they know this. They know that your frustration will get manifested into how you treat people and judge people from the group. Thus, you treat the people in this group differently because of their race. This agitation scheme, it creates racism and division, and they use this scheme to control and manipulate people by creating fear and division. They know that some will even act out from this agitation, and the media can then use them as an example to create more distrust and hate. Think of the white grocery store shooter in Buffalo who killed black people who didn't even know, or the black driver who ran down and murdered random white people at a Christmas parade. Both of them poisoned by the division schemes that we're talking about. And millions more Americans are fooled every day in our country by this incitement. But I don't want you to be fooled anymore. The next time you hear a news story that immediately causes you to have a feeling of hate and resentment against a particular group, rather than the individual committing the act, you should stop. That's exactly the response that they want you to have. They want you to direct your anger at the wrong people and wrong places. Don't continue to fall for these carefully crafted news stories and policies that have no benefit to anyone in our country other than to create hate. And if you're Mexican, don't think they're going to leave you on the sidelines forever. You're soon going to be targeted to ensure that you stay hateful and distrustful of other Americans also. But there are other reasons to create division. Some divisions created specifically to crush any idea or law that may benefit our future. What's interesting about this one, although we're all too often divided by race and political party, if you find yourself standing up and speaking out against one of the failed policies that are being forced upon us, it doesn't matter what race or party you belong to. You're immediately declared an enemy of the state. Some examples, things like wanting law and order in your neighborhood. They create division by repackaging this, that if you're white and want to protect your family, you're a racist. If you're black and want this, you're either ignored or you're called an Uncle Tom. People that believe in challenging the often incorrect information we're given to send our sons and daughters off to war to die, the media creates division here. They label these people, regardless of race or political party, traitors or unpatriotic for wanting to know the truth. People that don't want our borders overrun with illegal aliens and drugs, they divide us by labeling these people, black or white, as supremacists, even though no one wants one of their family members to be one of the next 100,000 drug overdose deaths this year. People that don't want men in their daughter's bathroom at school, again, race or political party plays no role. You get labeled as a homophobe and are guilty of a hate crime, according to the media. People that believe in Christian values for their family, doesn't matter what color your family is, you get labeled and separated as an extremist by the media, even though Christian values are the bedrock that our democracy is built upon. People of all races that support the God-given right to protect yourself and your family, they're labeled as child-murdering domestic terrorists, according to the media, even though this God-given right to protect yourself is enshrined in our Constitution. You get the picture. Anyone that supports policies that may be good for America, these supporters get labeled, separated, and declared an enemy to America. The exact opposite that they are. The real goal is to intimidate any opposition to their failed plans and create more division and resentment to ensure that you keep your energy focused on the wrong people and the wrong things. And their plan's been amazingly successful. As long as they keep us fighting amongst ourselves, we're not noticing the destruction of our country. But we can't allow them to distract us from the truth any longer. More and more Americans, and I invite you to join us, are rejecting this nonstop race baiting and division, because we're all seeing more clearly these failed policies, no matter how slickly they're packaged, they're detrimental to all Americans. There's only two legitimate positions here, good and evil. And although they're working hard to convince us that the groups other than our own are evil, none of the groups they divide us into have a monopoly on good or evil. There are good and evil individuals in all these groups that must be judged on their own actions and character, not lumped together and judged as a group. Don't do that. Whenever you hear them dividing us into groups to create hate and distract us from the real threats that we're facing, Recognize what they're doing. Reject it. Don't allow yourselves to continue to be divided and distracted into supporting the loss of life and loss of our futures anymore. Now, reason number 5, they use your emotions against you. And almost all these crazy failed policies being implemented in our country, they know that if the American people were rational and knew the facts, they would never support this nonsense. So in place of the truth, they present information to manipulate your emotions and your desire to be a good person, or they use the fear tactic to scare you into supporting ideals and policies that will destroy your future. This tactic is pretty obvious if you're paying attention. We discussed some of these in the first part, so I won't go into a lot of detail. They often include women, children, extreme suffering, and a ploy to mislead you into using short-term emotions to forget the bigger picture and make bad long-term decisions. Sad music, teary-eyed interviews, pain and misery, all presented to you so that you forget the facts behind the issue and get fooled into making an in-the-moment emotional decision. It isn't news at all, but manipulation intended to use your desire to do the right thing against you. In a similar way, they use fear to scare you into making bad decisions. Dangerous viruses, invading armies, terrorists, the end of the world, the threat of violence, the loss of your job, inflation, death. It's all coming for you unless you concede control of your life and give up your rights to the whims of the government and the media who claim that their supreme wisdom and strength will protect you. If you don't do what they say, the end is sure to come to you. And here's the sad truth. Some of these threats and reasons for fear are real, since these dangers are created by our government and media's actions. They create the threat, then they use it against you. Think about this. Another virus may come if you don't do what they say, since they're funding and creating the next virus. Terrorist attacks or invading armies may come to America based on their reckless and deadly endless war strategy and lack of will to protect our borders. Violence may come to your door due to their dangerous disregard to enforce our laws. Inflation may increase due to their reckless spending and debt. All of these and many more, created by their lack of commitment to our future, but conceding control and supporting the same people and policies that are creating these threats in the first place, that's lunacy. Saying no, that's the right thing, but the risk is they may unleash one of these dangers upon you to teach you a lesson, force you to live in fear to ensure that you do what they say, give up your family's future to benefit them. But we have to take that risk and do the right thing. We have to force them to expose themselves for what they are. The next time you see one of these emotional pleas or fear-inducing panic, just stop, because they're using these tactics to distract you from the truth in hopes that this fear or emotional response will lead you to support another failed ideal or policy that benefits them at your expense. When you see plenty of drama to prey on your emotions, but little substance or facts to back up their position, don't make a quick decision. Think through the issue. Get all the facts. Don't react emotionally. That's what they want you to do. And reason 6 is they create a crisis through their coverage. Then they use that crisis to rush through policies that are bad for you. We just saw the crisis tactic it played on us after the Uvalde tragedy. You see it often when it comes to foreign affairs, 9/11, Ukraine, and at home, COVID, inflation. And according to them, we need urgent action to pass new legislation that's good for them but bad for you and me. The media hypes up a tragedy, tells you we have to act now, like an hourglass or the opportunity of a lifetime passing us by if we don't rush through some new laws and legislation. The world, it may end, even though the issue may have been going on for decades. Right now, we can't afford to be thoughtful to develop a strategy that will actually solve the problem. Rather, we have to go into full panic mode. Just do something now. Suddenly, out of thin air often, a 1,000-page, a 5,000-page new bill appears in a mere few weeks of time, and nobody in the media tumbles to the conclusion that these bills, they were written months or years back, waiting for a crisis to exploit so they could ram another bad policy down our throat in the aftermath of a tragedy. It's crazy. 5,000-page bill comes out in the morning, Congress votes on it that afternoon. No lie. No need to read the bill, no time to read it. Pass it. We'll figure it out later. Our elected officials do this, and some even say it out loud. In reality, it doesn't matter if they read it. They don't even get to decide. They just get their orders and they follow them, all to the detriment of our country, of our future. What's even more crazy is we still have millions of Americans that get fooled by this tactic, and they're willing to sacrifice their rights, their future, and their lives by falling for these hyped up tragedies. It's like when you go to buy a car and the salesman tells you, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You can't even afford to go home tonight and think about it or verify it's a good deal. It's that good. These crisis mode schemes are a lot like this. No time to think about it. You just have to do it now. The next time you're told that we have to do something now, next time you get pressured into making split-second decisions without reading the fine print, we should stop. Let's take the time to find out why it's so urgent. Why don't they want you to think about the situation to see if it's really the good deal that they claim it is? Don't fall for the crisis scheme anymore. Now, if you hadn't noticed, several of these schemes are often used together to deceive you. It's like they work off a checklist. Think about some of the recent news stories, Uvalde, Ukraine, COVID, inflation. Just work down the checklist. You only get 5% of the story? Check. What's reported isn't even true? Check. Repeat the deception over and over again since it can't stand on its own merits? Check. Use division to divide us? Check. What's shown is emotionally manipulative and not fact-based? Check. Create a crisis that requires us to act now without time to fully understand the problem or solution? Check. It's good stuff. But being good propaganda doesn't make it true or right for you or your future. Set an example for fellow Americans. Let's stand tall for what's right. Let's not cave to the endless stream of manipulation that's trying to convince us that sacrificing our future and our family's future is the right thing. It isn't. And this is a good stopping point for part 2. As you go through about your life this week, I want you to concentrate on identifying the tricks that we talked about today. Think about the checklist up to this point. Am I getting the whole story? Is the information correct? Is it presented in endless repetition because it can't stand on the facts? Is it information just intended to divide us while offering no solution or real information? Does this attempt to scare us or prey on our emotions to lead you to make bad decisions you'd never make if you thought about it rationally? Is it wrapped up in a new crisis that they claim requires split-second decisions rather than thoughtful discussion and solutions? What you will find is almost everything you hear and see this week will fit into one of these deceptive tactics. Some, all of them. Yet there are still other ways to separate you from the truth and trick our country into perpetual failure and decline. Other schemes that you need to be able to recognize. So in part 3, I'd like to conclude this list of tricks that you get exposed to daily that manipulate you into making bad decisions for our future. Our country is destined to continue on our current path of failure if we continue to use the same sources of information from people that don't have an allegiance to America, don't have an allegiance to our future. Let's get off the path of failure. Let's use the truth, not propaganda, as the basis for our future. We're going to use that truth not to divide Americans, but unite Americans. I'll see you for part 3.